Hey guys. All right, so in the last chapter, Annie and Samuel were traveling towards New York, and Samuel wasn't real sure how they were going to manage getting into the city and trying to find his parents. Civilian deaths. Civilian mortalities have been underreported in wars and are nearly impossible to verify. Most historians and governments are forced to guess at the numbers because not only are birth and death certificates, church records, tax rolls, and immigration documentation frequently destroyed during combat, but the true numbers are, in many cases, never counted in order to hide them from a country's own people as well as the enemy. Once mass weapons such as cannons and guns were developed and used by the military, far more civilians were killed simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we don't always know how many innocent people are killed during war. Chapter 13. The signs were on the side of a tree, two boards hacked into the shape of an arrow and nailed up with large handmade cut nails. One pointed to a trail that went straight south. Crude letters, Philadelphia, 41 miles. The other arrow pointed straight east, New York, 38 And if you can look, that's how they reported it. What do they say? Annie asked. I can get the letters, but I can't put them together so good. Yet. Samuel told her, about the same to either place, a 3-day walk. Let's get off the trail, I've got to think on it. They moved back into the undergrowth and settled out of sight. What's to think about, Annie said. We go to New York to get our ma and pa. She did not realize what she said, but Samuel heard the hour. Something had happened in her mind. She'd found a way to stand it all, to keep going. Samuel nodded. Why do you think the little girl said, we've got to go get our ma and pa? Because it's not her mom and dad. Why did she say that?
Is their sister and brother?
They're not. What had Caleb said? Oh, yes, New York was British, but the Americans still held Philadelphia, the center of the new government. Had his mother and father come by here and seen this sign? Did they know that safety and refuge were just 40 miles away? And did they have to go on to New York? He shook his head. I ought to take you into Philadelphia, where it's safe, and find a place for you. No, I ain't gonna leave you. You're the only family I have. It won't help to leave me someplace because I'll just run and follow you. No matter what you say, we're going to find our folks. That's all there is to it. We're going to New York. What I was going to say, together, was that it would take too long to go down there and come back, 6 or 7 days, so I guess we'll stick together. Good, that's settled. Samuel almost smiled. She looked so ragged, her dress was indescribably dirty, and so was her face. Her hair stuck out at odd angles. The dirt was caked on her legs, and her feet looked like shoe leather, and yet she was ready to do what had to be done. I'm proud, he thought, to have you as a sister. All right, then, he said, let's go. They had a stroke of luck after they turned down New York. Later that day, they saw a farm with fresh corn in the field. They crept into the edge of the field and took enough ears for dinner. Just after leaving the field, back in the woods alongside the trail, they heard an awful racket coming up the road from the rear. Something on wheels was clanging and rattling along. They were far enough back in the thickest part of the undergrowth so they couldn't see what it was. It stopped nearby. All was quiet, and then Samuel heard dogs panting. Before he and Annie could move, 2 black and white, mostly collie dogs came up to them in the brush, looked at them each for a moment, directly into their eyes, and gently tried to push them out toward the road, using their shoulders against Samuel's and Annie's legs. Hey, Samuel whispered, leave off. He heard a laugh. You might as well come out of there, a coarse, deep voice shouted. I know right where you are, and I've got a 2-gauge swivel gun aimed at you. You stay here, Samuel whispered to Annie. I'll see what's going on. But no, she was not going to stay, and they both stood and walked out of the brush, the collies nudging them along. A huge freight wagon stood on the road, so stacked up with all sorts of everything, from bundles of rags to loops of tin pots tied up like garlands, to 2 saddles, to barrels and buckets and a rocking chair, that it looked enormous, a junk pile on wheels being pulled by 2 scruffy mules. "How's your day?" the man on the wagon asked, spitting and in such a thick Scottish brogue that it was difficult to understand him. "I'm Abner McDougall, tinker at large. The 2 dogs are William and Wallace, named after a Scottish hero." He saw Samuel's rifle, and he held up his hands. "Don't shoot. I was making a jest about the swivel gun. I'm not armed. As you can see, don't believe in shooting things." He seemed to be dressed in sewn-together rags and looked as untidy as the junk he was carrying. His voice had a horrible rasping sound, like a steel shovel edge hitting rocks and gravel, and he was absolutely covered in unkempt gray hair. It was almost impossible to see his face for the hair, and the lower part of his beard was soaked with tobacco stains from dribbled spit. "I'm Samuel," Samuel said, "and this is Annie." Abner nodded and then looked at the dogs, which had moved in front of the mules and were peering down the trail in the direction of New York. "Get in the back of the wagon," Abner said. "What?" "Get in the back of the wagon. Hide the rifle. Now, quick. Someone wrong is coming." "Wrong? Move. Hide the gun." Abner's firm voice left no room for argument. Sam took Annie's hand, and they climbed up in the back of the wagon. There was just room for them to sit with their legs out on the opened wagon bed. Samuel hid his rifle and powder horn beneath a pile of cloth. He had no sooner done this than there was the sound of hoofs. A troop of British cavalry dragoons came around the bend in front of the wagon and stopped. Samuel could see through the side of the wagon. There were about 20 riders in red uniforms and high fur hats and knee-high boots. They were carrying short muskets and sabers. The horses were well lathered, snorting and breathing hard, and the group broke formation and spread around the wagon. 2 men pulled their sabers and started poking in the load from the sides until Abner said, "Careful there. There's my bairns inside." "Your what?" The commanding officer pulled up next to Abner. "My grandchildren. Don't go poking them with your stickers." "The purpose of your trip?" "We're headed for New York. I buy things and sell things. Would you be looking for anything in particular yourself? You could have any kind of illegal goods in there." The officer nodded at the wagon. "Any kind of contraband." "I could, but I don't. And besides, I have a merchant's pass from the commanding general's staff, handwritten, signed, and sealed, all official." "Well, let me see it." Samuel heard the rustle of paper being passed back and forth. He could not see the front of the wagon, and then the officer's brusque voice. "All right, then, pass on. But watch for anything suspicious. We've just taken New York, and a lot of the rebel runners and deserters are trying to make their way to Philadelphia." Samuel looked at the troopers around the back of the wagon who were looking at him. One smiled and nodded at Annie, but she sat quietly, her eyes big and her jaw tight. "Fall in," the officer commanded, and the men wheeled their horses into formation and rode past. "Up, Brutus! Up, Jill!" Abner slapped the reins across the rumps of the mules, and they grunted and started pulling the wagon, which began to roll ahead slowly. "Stay in the wagon until they're out of sight," Abner said. "Until they're gone. Then come up on the seat. We'll talk." Samuel was confused. He decided to trust no one, and yet this old man had come forward and lied for them. He wasn't sure what to do, but some part of him wanted to trust Abner. He watched the cavalry unit disappear around a bend in the road, and then stood and climbed alongside the load until he was at the seat looking down at the backs of the mules. Annie sat down in the middle next to Abner, and Samuel took the outside. "How did you know they were wrong?" Samuel asked. "The dogs. They told me." "The dogs told you?" Annie scoffed. "I didn't hear nothing." "That's because you don't know how to listen. It's in the way they stand, how their ears set, the hair on their back. If you know the dogs and they know you, they will tell you what to expect." "Well, how did you know we might think the British soldiers were bad?" Abner slapped the reins on the mules. "Pick it up, pick it up. How could I think otherwise? Somebody comes down the trail and you hide in the bushes. This is largely a British road. You come out carrying a gun at the ready," he laughed. "It's hard to think you'd act that way with a friend." "We don't like the British," Annie said suddenly. "They're all bad. Every one of them." They both stared at her. "They killed our folks, our family," her voice cracked. "And I miss them. I miss my ma and my pa. I even miss the red chicken that pecked my toes." She started crying, leaning against Samuel. "I think," Abner said, "you'd better tell me what happened." In Samuel's complete surprise, he took a breath and did just that. So your response today is, what do you think Abner is going to do? What do you predict Abner is going to do for them? And where did he come from? What is he doing? He's from Scotland. He's a Scottish person. But he's coming from New York City, or he's headed to New York City. And what do you think his intentions are? All right.